Hello, welcome back to another episode of the TFR Podcast. We are back today to review the British Grand Prix that was won by Lando Norris this weekend, and it was a shock podium, a first ever podium for Nico Hulkenberg, arguably the most popular podium of all time. And there was also some big news off the circuit over at Red Bull, which we'll be getting on to later on in today's episode. But welcome, Owen. Once again, you're back. 2 podcasts in a row. And we previewed the British Grand Prix, and now we're here to review the British Grand Prix. And I have to say, I think it delivered in terms of what we were hoping for. We gave it the big build-up of every year it's a good race, and it usually delivers in terms of entertainment, drama, and the storylines. And I think it delivered that in bucket loads, really.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely the Grand Prix, the best Grand Prix so far this season, I'd say. Just on every sort of level, yeah, what a race. And it's nice to see a Brit on top of the podium at the British Grand Prix.
Yes, exactly. We're not biased here, but we are conveniently both British. So we did say that it would be quite nice if a British winner would win this one. And also, actually, a different kind of British winner as well, because I think the last British winner before Lewis Hamilton obviously dominated this race for years and years was probably David Coulthard, which is like early 2000s. So it's actually a long time since, you think all the other drivers like Jenson Button and so on who have raced at the circuit and not done very well. Yeah, and so it's quite good to see somebody do good at this track, and there's not some kind of British curse outside of Lewis Hamilton, who himself was once again in sensational form, you'd have to say, at this track. There is something about Hamilton and Silverstone, but he didn't quite get the podium, and we'll get onto his race later on. But let's start off with Norris, though. Let's go into that in a little bit more detail. It was a bit of a race of two halves, really, because Piastri got a fairly good start at the beginning, did quite get ahead of the pole sitter Verstappen, which we must say as well, he had a fantastic qualifying to get that car on pole position and really caught everyone napping, really, with the very last lap of qualifying. But Max led the very early stages with Piastri hot on his tail until Piastri finally got past Verstappen down the hangar straight, and then it kind of started to fall away for Verstappen. He made another mistake. Norris picked him off as well. And then for a chunk of the race, and it looked like Piastri had it under control, but there was a small enough gap there where Norris was still at play, wasn't he? But it was really the moment where the weather changed once more, and if you're for some reason listening to this and you didn't watch the race, it was obviously very mixed conditions at Silverstone, and it was that key point to where the race suddenly turned on its head, didn't it?
Yeah, I think if we go back to qualifying on a Saturday, I actually have to say I felt Norris was actually, despite obviously qualifying third, was actually relatively off the pace compared to what we'd already seen in the 3 practice sessions prior to qualifying that weekend. He looks in practice as if he's going to be much quicker than what he was going to, when we ended up being in qualifying. Just like Verstappen looked like he was much slower than what he actually ended up being in qualifying. Managed to put that Red Bull in pole position with one hell of a lap around Silverstone. But for the race itself, obviously Piastri with an amazing start. I think it's important to note that despite Lando winning, I think he has got extremely lucky with certain elements of the race there, and with penalties handed out and weather and whatnot. But I mean, you've had to be in it to win it, and Norris did just that. He kept himself in the right position, kept himself in the race, and was there ready to pounce when penalties were handed out and somebody couldn't control their car and keep it on the track.
Yes, let's dive into that incident. It was, at that kind of safety car race. I actually, that was the one time I nipped out the room when I was watching the race on Sunday, and then I could suddenly hear, the whole kind of commentators saying, like Verstappen's gone past the leader on the safety car. So I sprinted back in the room to see what happened, and then I saw Verstappen facing the wrong way. I was like, what on earth happened there? So rewinded it, and then obviously saw what went on, and the key thing here was obviously there was a fairly late safety car kind of call to bring it in the pit lane, but we've seen far worse than that actually. But Piastri, he has done this before at safety car restarts where he slows the pack right down, and it's obviously a tactic to, get their tyres quite cold as well. I think the McLaren, as we know, is very good with its tyres, so they probably don't mind a really slow restart and then just lighten it up and building that gap to the car behind. The difference here, Owen, was obviously it was wet conditions, and there was just actually, I think as well, they had just gone under that bridge that goes over the hangar straight there, and you just wonder if maybe the shadow off that and other elements with the spray as well, it just became a bit more unsighted, and Verstappen, just went straight past Piastri, and was straight on the buzzer, and obviously Piastri got a penalty. What did you make of the incident yourself? Do you think the 10-second penalty was correct, or how do you see it?
First things first, I think the penalty was spot on. I think what sets the precedent right from the start is the fact that we look back to Canada, the Russell incident, the stewards defined 30 psi of brake pressure as the sort of threshold prior to a penalty. Piastri's brake pressure was 60 psi in, horrendous conditions, really. I mean, if you watch Verstappen's POV of the incident, he can't see Piastri's car, and then all of a sudden there's this McLaren parked in the middle of the circuit, and Verstappen has had to go past him. He's had to go past him, and it's on Piastri. It's definitely on Piastri. That's what I make of it. And it's unfortunate what happened to Verstappen after the restart, because I think that was down to the incident that occurred. But I mean, it's all worked out for our race winner Lando Norris.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It was a gift, you'd have to say, for Lando, because of obviously Piastri having to pit later on for those dry tyres. Would have been interesting if, Piastri, I don't know, if they didn't have to pit again, if he was able to get that gap. I don't think he would have, actually. I think Norris, had enough pace to kind of keep with Piastri. But you hit the nail on the head there, Owen, because as you said, with that Canada incident, that's a prime example of it's not enough. And also that was in dry conditions, which I think has a big impact on these scenarios. People that say it doesn't, I don't think that's right. I think, the slowing speeds in wet to dry has a massive impact. And Piastri just got it wrong. I think you just have to hold your hands up. You got it wrong. And they were not happy. And I think that was the most unhappy I've ever seen Piastri in his time in F1. He's not a man of many emotions, Owen. Like, I have to say, he's usually as cool as a cucumber, but this time around, he was not happy, wasn't he? It was even in the interviews after the race, he felt quite, robbed of a win almost. Yeah,
obviously he's a young guy. He's probably been in motorsport for a while, but he's not been in F1 for that long. A young guy, who's fighting for a world championship in his third season in Formula One, I believe. Second season even, sorry. Is it second, third? I'm not sure. But
I think third,
obviously fighting for a world championship against his teammate. He's gonna be a bit cheesed off. But what I didn't like was the sort of out and out sort of grumpiness. There wasn't any sort of congratulations to Lando. And if this was the other way around, I truly believe if Lando was showing that behaviour, there'd be people after him. That there would be a real hate force out for him. But there's nothing like that for Piastri. I get it. It's not nice to lose, and especially in them circumstances. But the incident falls at his feet. Unfortunately, he's made the error. I hope that in sort of debriefs and stuff, it's been explained to him as to why and whatnot. But in that moment, he was. I just feel he was a little bit too prickly, really. But yeah, you're right. We haven't seen him like that. He's either usually cool and composed, but he looked like he had a real head loss after the Grand Prix.
Yeah, which was interesting because I kind of agree, because the incident itself was not like Vettel at Canada 2019 or something, where you've really got a case that you've been robbed there by the stewards and they're kind of unfairness. And, no matter how you feel about it, you could kind of see why they gave him a penalty. And surely he deep down will understand that after the race and when the adrenaline's taken away as well. But for him and McLaren, I think there was a moment where even McLaren was suggesting on the Sky coverage that they would protest the penalty, which obviously Piastri was quite clever because he took that and then kind of was suggesting to the team, well, if you do agree with me, then why don't we just swap the cars later on? Mm. And I mean, could you imagine that, Owen? Imagine that if you think about that whole Hungary situation last year. You imagine if we got to the end of that race and McLaren were pleading for Norris to let Piastri through and stuff like that all over again at his home race. I mean, that would have been crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it's not we've seen McLaren mess up team orders before, and it didn't really worry me because I think when you're in Piastri's position, like you sort of have to try that. You have to say, you'll let me back through, and just because there's a sort of 50% chance the team goes, yeah, okay. Because of where they qualified and they don't, if they didn't believe it was right. I think McLaren probably knew that it was a penalty all along, but they obviously have to protest it for Oscar's sake, because if they hadn't have protested it, I'm sure Oscar would have been kicking up a massive fuss about it. So, yeah, I think it's one of them heat at the moment things, really. I'm glad that they haven't sort of come together and there doesn't seem to be any sort of damage to the sort of teammate relationship. I think this is Piastri's probably going through similar to what Norris went through after Canada right now, emotionally. He obviously Norris missed out on points altogether in Canada, but Piastri's missed out on a big race win that would have extended his championship lead again. Instead, Norris has taken another big chunk out of it. So, yeah, he's probably experiencing all sorts of feelings. I'm sure come the next race in Belgium, Spa, it will all be resolved again and they'll be ready to go racing.
Yeah, I think this is the point as well, is it's a 14-point swing. So it is a big deal in terms of, Piastri would have extended that lead at the top of the standings to a really, healthy margin. And then now it's kind of really shrunk down. I think it was only 8 points now, the gap between the two. When you think of what's gone on this season to Norris, and that Canada incident was only a couple of races ago, but suddenly now the championship is really looking back on for Norris, and not that it wasn't before, but he's brought himself right back into play. These couple of wins and the way that he's won them as well, had a bit of good fortune and a bit of good racecraft in Austria. It's really kind of probably galvanized his season now in terms of he was probably feeling a bit down that it's this is maybe one of my few opportunities of a championship and I'm making these mistakes, but now he's finally grabbed the bull by the horns, Owen, and I think Norris is, would you say the momentum swung back in his favour for this part of the season?
I think he has to be on top on championship points to fully say that the momentum swung, but it's definitely on the way there. I think two race wins on the bounce, that's always an achievement. If he can somehow make it 3 in Spa, then I would say the momentum has definitely swung. But yeah, it's I think Norris probably prefers. There's probably an element of him that prefers being the underdog in the situation because it's much easier to win a championship when there's something to chase. And he's had something to chase all season in Oscar. So he's finally catching up, and the confidence is quite clearly back. This is a different Lando Norris now we're seeing to the one we saw post Canada. Mentally, we spoke about that last week. Obviously, Lando's has spoken about that quite a lot, and he looks full of confidence at the moment. He looks very happy, and yeah, it's great to see. I'm chuffed to bits for him because obviously Britain was a race that he wanted to win, and he's ever closer to that, taking over in the World Championship.
Yeah, I thought it was almost quite emotional scenes when you watch the post kind of podium ceremony and everything, because when he got out of the car and the kind of embrace that he had with his mother, and that's what it's all about. For an F1 driver, that's the stuff you remember when you retire, is winning the British Grand Prix and your family being there. And I thought that was really quite amazing stuff to watch, really, because that's really all we talked before about the hate that Norris gets and all that outside noise. But all that doesn't matter when you've got those kind of things. That's what you do it for. And yeah, it's going to be fascinating. We've got a bit of a gap now until Belgium, but how this kind of championship plays out in the second half of the season, because we are obviously officially halfway through now, and this title fight didn't really have too many moments, let's say, at the beginning of the season, but now it's really starting to heat up. Every race there's something that happens, in another kind of twist in the tail, if you like, of the McLaren teammate kind of title fight. And yeah, it's not quite your Rosberg Hamiltons yet, but it has the potential to get to that point later in the season. Now, a word on the other driver that was on the podium. I think we have to get into this because I've had to hold myself together to get to this point, because I think I would go as far as to say is the moment of the season so far, because I don't know about you, Owen, I have watched this man's career in F1 for a good 15 years, and I've been hoping and praying for this to happen eventually. But Nico Hulkenberg has finally got a podium in F1, and what a way of doing it. I mean, you couldn't write it, really. It was like the closing stages. You had the home kind of favourite in Hamilton chasing him down for that podium spot. I mean, talk about like almost poetry, and he was able to hang on, and yeah, I mean, a fantastic result for Sauber as well. But a word on Hulkenberg.
Incredible. What a race. I don't know whether you've seen the video that has been put out online of basically Sauber trying to get him to come in. And Hulkenberg was just completely going against what the team suggestion was, because he had a feel for the car. He knew exactly what he was doing. Obviously, he had Hamilton chasing him down. He actually had to get Stroll as well at one point as well, by the way, who also had a very good race. I'm sure we'll touch on that as well a bit later on. But Hulkenberg, what a race. I've always said, and I think the way he's driven that Sauber this season probably backs this up, but I've always said that he's a far better driver than what he's recognised for. I mean, he's won Le Mans. Not many drivers win Le Mans, and so he's obviously got talent. And I think he's probably wasted in a team like Sauber. I genuinely believe if you put him in that McLaren this season, he would be challenging for the world title. If you put him in the second seat of Red Bull, he would be coming pretty close to Verstappen. I believe he's that good. Wow. But I don't think he's ever really been given the car to show it. He's a bit of Renault and Sauber, Haas, Force India as well. He's never really been given the car to truly show his F1 potential. So chuffed a bits for him. What a result. And next one's the race win, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, literally. I mean, I'd happily see that. Let's not kind of just settle for the podium. I mean, there was points of that race. If the McLarens, had collided or something, then who knows? That could have happened. But I mean, yeah, I remember when I was a kid watching that 2012 Brazilian Grand Prix when Hulkenberg, that was the closest he's ever been to winning a race, and had that crash with Hamilton, and I was gutted then. And I thought, he's got to get it at some point, in the near future, and it never came. He never had that kind of as good of a chance, really. I know people say about like Germany 2019 and things like that, but they weren't quite as crystal clear as that opportunity where he was literally leading the race. And like you say, he's never had a great car to do it in. So that's really been part of this unlucky streak, if you like, is because, he's always having to just depend on a bit of luck to even just do it. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right. He's definitely a top 10 driver on the grid in my eyes, for sure. And I just think I'm relieved, to be honest, because he would have just been remembered for that when he retired. And he'll probably still be remembered for it in a way because of, the way it's happened. But the fact that he has finally done it at probably towards the latter stages of his career, he's got Audi coming next season, so who knows what that'll be like. But yeah, it was just, I genuinely couldn't believe it until the last couple of laps. I was like, the gaps are big enough here. He's going to do it. Because, yeah, I swear someone's predicted that on this podcast. For years, they've been like, Hulkenberg's going to get a podium this season. And then finally now it's happened. I did feel quite sorry for him that the trophy was made out of Lego. I don't know what you thought about that. I mean,
I
he probably
mean,
doesn't care, but you know,
I read somewhere that they still had real pieces of gold, silver, and bronze in them, so I don't think you can
fair enough.
complain. But look, he's done 239 Grand Prix and one podium. Bro's not gonna care what his trophy's
It could have
made
been
out of. It could be
anything.
made out of straw, yeah, and he still would have fucking held it high in the air. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think it matters. I mean, but I did find was a con though was Norris obviously got a real trophy and a Lego
I know,
trophy.
too. I know.
You know what a con, what a con. But yeah, oh well.
Crazy. I mean, you know, is this gonna? Who knows? This could be a new thing. That the race winner gets 2 trophies and a medal.
Well, I hope they give you instructions for if you break it in half or something to put it back together.
Well, you mentioned that, Owen. The constructors trophy, McLaren's. I saw that had actually been dropped. That had actually been broken by one of the staff members. I don't know who specifically, but one of them had dropped the constructors trophy, and part of it broke off. So yes, that it's got to be one of the more delicate ones. That is for sure. And I have to say, when I saw Norris, obviously was doing his champagne thing where he smacks the bottle against. I was worried for Hulkenberg's trophy when I saw that that it the one trophy he's got, do not break it. But yes, it was an interesting thing for them to do. I'm not a massive fan of it. I think it was a little bit kind of sponsorship heavy for my liking, but it was a bit of fun, I guess. But yes, what about for Sauber in some sense though? I know, like, obviously all of this is Hulkenberg, and obviously, like you said, Owen, it was his decisive calls in the race to make this happen. But they have had a quite sensational turnaround this season, because they were slam dunk back of the grid, proper back markers for ages. But then since the turn of the Spanish Grand Prix and conveniently this flexi wing change, they have just keep going up and up. I mean, their results just get better by the race.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely weren't very good at the start of the season. I think since they've sort of swapped to kick, and Alfa Romeo left his head by sponsor, there seemed to be sort of a lack of bounce for Sauber. And obviously now we're on the season before Audi come in. So maybe that bounce is coming back. Maybe there's new people being added into the team ready for Audi's arrival in 2026. And yeah, they've done exceptionally well. I think Hulkenberg, despite this podium, even if this podium had not have occurred, he still pulled that car to some incredible places in races over the season. Spain, for example. I mean, what a race that was for him. Got some really good points for Sauber. So yeah, it's good to see them obviously get a podium and get a nice big chunk of points. I'm not sure where it will lead them at the end of the season, but yeah, we'll see.
I do think Jonathan Wheatley has done a great job since he's came in this season. I think he just is a real, good team principal kind of leader vibe, a little bit like how what's his name at Williams? How's that escaped me?
James Vowles.
James Vowles, that's it. He went in there and immediately you could just tell he was a good team principal. It suits him well. And I'd say the same thing with Jonathan Wheatley here. He's gone from working at Red Bull for a long time and then just took that role with obviously Matteo Binotto kind of within that kind of leadership group, if you like, with the whole Sauber Audi thing. And they just look a really good team now. And they've obviously jumped right up in the Constructors' Championship, which will be great for the kind of finances of the team. And with Audi coming in, they need that. They need to not finish bottom of that Constructors. And yeah, I was really pleased for them all around. For Hulkenberg, the team, it's their first podium since 2012 with Kamui Kobayashi at Japan, so they themselves had waited a long old time. So yeah, I think that is the feel-good story of the season almost. I'd be absolutely gobsmacked if that gets beaten.
No, I don't think anything's topping that this season. But who knows? If Audi come in next year and deliver a challenging car, could we see Hulkenberg World Drivers' Championship next year?
I'll take it. Absolutely. If they win in Australia next season, I'm a full-on Audi supporter. Yeah. I'll go straight in there and say that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm all for a Hulkenberg title charge. But that was that, though. And I think we we'll probably talk about some of the other drivers around that kind of top half of the field, not necessarily that had good races or bad races, but obviously Verstappen was in the mix for the win at the first part, but he had his spin, at that safety car restart. What do we put that down to there, Owen? Is that just cold tires, or is there other things at play there? Because it was a costly mistake, and then after that, he really could only recover to a 5th place, which, for considering the pace that he had in qualifying, probably not too pleased with.
I mean, I'll be honest, I don't think he particularly had the race pace anyway. Norris was catching him just prior to that safety car, I think. So I don't think he was ever going to have the race pace to 1 win or 2, even finish second. And I think what happened on the safety car restart is probably down to a couple of things. It's probably down to the tyres going cold, and also emotion. Like if he is either shaken or like angry from what Piastri has done, it has an effect on you in the car, and it only takes a heavy right foot in the rain to slide you out. So we've seen lots of that in the last 2 weeks of TFR eSports, I think. So
yes, don't mention it. Yeah, probably including me at some point. But yes, I think you're probably right. It was, just one of those things with Max. But another awful race for Red Bull. I mean, I know Max recovered to 5th, and that probably kind of went a bit under the radar. But again, Yuki Tsunoda way off it, like in Austria. And I think they've picked up like 10 points in the last 2 Grand Prix across the Red Bull team. And that's just not good enough. And, they are very, very likely to finish 4th in the Constructors, I would say. And, something's got to change. And obviously, as we'll get on to later, something has changed, whether that is connected to performances or something else. There obviously has been big news, but we'll save that for later. You'll have to listen through the whole podcast to get to that part. Lewis Hamilton had a good weekend, didn't he? He was very much the better Ferrari driver. And there's something about him and Silverstone, isn't there? I mean, he obviously lost his streak of something like 12 seasons in a row of being on the podium at the British Grand Prix, which is crazy in itself. But he was actually, would you say he was in the mix this weekend for winning? And maybe is this more of a disappointment from his side, or do you think there's still positives there?
I think he would have struggled to win against both of them McLarens. I certainly expected him to be in the mix for second, third, at least get onto the bottom step of that podium. I think he will be disappointed with the weekend, how it's gone. I think he probably expected a lot more, just from himself and how much how good at Silverstone as a track he is. But also the other thing to know is about the Ferraris looked very pacey coming into the weekend as well. In the practice sessions, they looked like they were going to be proper toe to toe with the McLarens. I think we said last week after we'd watched sort of practice 1, practice 2,
we were tricked.
We were tricked. We were tricked. Red Bull, they sandbagged Verstappen's Red Bull in practice, and the Ferraris had rockets attached to their cars in the qualifying, I think, in the practice sessions, I think. So, I think Hamilton will be disappointed, but I mean, it's still not a bad race for Ferrari, really. It's not horrendous considering everything that has gone on. It could be far worse.
Yes, I think it wasn't bad for Hamilton. It was certainly bad for a certain Charles Leclerc. I think that was probably one of the most miserable races he's had there. And you have to say, he has got an awful record in recent years at Silverstone. And he definitely seems to struggle a lot in these mixed conditions. It seems to be a new, Achilles heel of Charles. I don't know. Is that driver, Owen, or is that maybe all of it together of Ferrari's communication and maybe the car, or what do you put your finger on with that whole stuff?
I mean, if you think back to that radio message in Australia, it could be communication. It's probably the water.
Yeah.
It's
That's an all-timer, that one.
Yeah, that was an all-timer, definitely. But I think it's probably an amalgamation of a few things. There's obviously drivers that are very strong in the wet, and there's drivers that struggle. I don't want to say Leclerc struggles because he is a top tier racing driver, top tier Formula One driver, and he probably is quite quick in the wet. But I think it depends who you're surrounded by, and sort of what happens to you in the race, and also that car as well. Like I don't, we rarely see that Ferrari quite as far back as Leclerc was at points in that Grand Prix, and surrounded by as many cars. So, what sort of effect is that having on it with dirty air and bits and pieces? There's plenty of factors that come into play for it. Obviously, a miserable weekend, but yeah, I'm sure he'll go again.
Yeah, exactly. It's something that he's just got to put behind him, and it's frustrating for his case because the car was actually not too bad for once. But I think, like you say, if I think in dry conditions, if that race on Sunday was dry, Ferrari would have definitely had a car on the podium, but it wasn't to be, and it's something that happens, and the British weather just decided to play a bit of havoc. I mean, it obviously benefited some others as well, such as Lance Stroll and Pierre Gasly. Stroll really was on a good strategy, wasn't he? I mean, Aston Martin, they were, with one of the cars, they were on the ball with it. I mean, they just waited. They didn't jump too early with that first stop, and they just got it perfect, where technically, if the weather kept going like that way and there was no safety cars, which seemed like every 5 minutes we were getting a safety car at one point, Stroll could have been the net leader, which is absolutely crazy to say that. But at that time, if everybody had to pit and there was no safety cars, he was in a really good position. He did fall away at the end of the race and ended up, I think, about 7th in the end, which, is points, but it's not what it kind of was looking like. But a word on his performance. He seems to do very well in these conditions.
Yeah, he's obviously very good in the wet. I think back to was it Turkey? That
2020.
he put it on pole in the wet, I believe, and then raced a pretty good race in the wet. I've just remembered Sochi 2021, and that was not very good in the wet. But we all they all have sort of good days and bad days in Formula One. But yeah, I think it was a good race from him. I think what it probably came down to in the end was the car itself and its ability to actually, it's straight line speed ability, because I've heard that's pretty awful on the Aston, and also the ability to look after his tyres as well. I think that's probably what's hindered him in the end. But I mean, Aston Martin as a team, they made the perfect calls. Bringing him onto the softs for that short little window of dry before the rain came again allowed him to make up positions and get into a position, where he was, looking like he was going to get on the podium. Well, he was on the podium at one point. And obviously Hulkenberg chased him down, but still a good weekend. And it's nice to see. I know Stroll gets a lot of slander. I'm not completely convinced by him. I think that Aston Martin probably could have a better driver lineup if they replace Stroll. But it's nice to see a driver that gets so much slander and so much stick, do well and pick up some points. It's nice, and it sort of proves that maybe they aren't quite as bad as what they think. He's still got to be a good level of a driver to be in Formula One in the first place.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I'm pleased for him. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, exactly. Credit where it is due. He did, a good drive to get that. I mean, it does make you wonder though, Owen, if that was Alonso on that same strategy and Alonso was up there instead of Stroll. You wonder if he could have hung on better. I mean, you say about that Hulkenberg move on Stroll. I did think, I can't lie, I celebrated that quite badly, when that happened, because, I was desperate for that Hulkenberg podium. But he got picked off quite easy, considering it was literally for, a third place spot. That was probably my only, if I'm being picky here, my only critique of his race is just, you didn't really, you weren't able to hold him off, if you like. And in the end, like I say, the 7th place, it's not the greatest result, but it's still points on the board. He's obviously, with that Australia result early in the season, the points that he got from that, he's still quite far up the standings in comparison to other drivers because of that result. So, yeah, well done to Stroll, and well done to Gasly as well. He had a bit more of a, let's say, under-the-radar race. He wasn't exactly in too much. He had a bit of a battle with Hamilton at one point, which I have to say it was a fantastic move from Hamilton to go right round. Well, he tried to go around the outside, didn't he? I can't remember if the actual move was around the outside. I'm trying to think. You know, he had a few goes, didn't he?
I don't think he quite. I don't think. I can't really remember. There's so much happened in that race.
There was,
my mind
I know,
is
yeah.
completely
There's a
stopped.
very specific moment.
I think he attempted to go around the outside. And it didn't quite happen. It didn't quite stick. But yeah, I can't. Yeah.
Yeah, I wish I could kind of just, remember every lap in my head, but unfortunately, yes, that specific one has slipped away. But yeah, a good result for Pierre Gasly and much needed, actually. I think he was probably, starting to feel a little bit of pressure, and Alpine definitely were feeling the pressure because they were obviously rock bottom of the standings. I think they might still be, actually. Which I will check. Yes, they are actually. They are still 10 points behind Haas, who have dropped to 9th actually, with all of what went on, which Haas, really, that surprised me actually, how they're suddenly now falling down the order. They had actually a bit of a rough kind of weekend, didn't they? I mean, Ollie Behrman had that big penalty from the red flag infringement in qualifying and had, decent pace in the race, but obviously got involved in incidents as well. But a word on that red flag incident, because that was absolutely bizarre, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Haas just had a horrible weekend overall, really. I mean, I feel sorry for Behrman because he got through to Q3 in a Haas, and obviously had a 10-place grid penalty for what had happened the week before, for the red flag incident, obviously. But Haas just overall just had a terrible weekend, and then they ended up crashing into each other anyway. So poor weekend for them. Yeah, it's just not great, and I feel sorry for him because it's his first home Grand Prix, and it's just not the way you want it to end.
No, but I think he'll have a few more British Grand Prix at least. That is for sure. I think Ollie Behrman has a good future ahead of him, and for Haas, they probably just need to go back to the drawing board a little bit because it's funny, they've got a much better race car, I think, than previous seasons, but actually this is not the season for that. In some sense, this season you need a good qualifying car because of the way the dirty air is, and if this was the Haas from a couple of years ago when they were getting into Q3 on a regular basis, like Hulkenberg, really dragging that car up the many times he did, then they would be, seriously in the points a lot this season. But unfortunately, they make life difficult for themselves with their poor qualifying. Another team that had a poor weekend, unfortunately, for the British hope of George Russell, but Mercedes in general, they were not on it, were they? I mean, not a great weekend at all. They took a few gambles with the strategies, and it didn't pay off, did it? I mean, I get it. It's difficult, those races, when the rain is so unpredictable and somebody's going to get it wrong. But Mercedes really got it badly wrong, didn't they, Owen?
Yeah, they did. You got to feel sorry for Russell because I think he thought maybe with the sort of colder weather conditions, which we've seen the Mercedes succeeding over the course of the season, I think he probably thought, I've got a good chance this weekend. And it's ended up not being that way for him, unfortunately. So, and I think there's probably within his thinking as well that obviously he's been in Formula One a similar amount of time to Lando now. He might have thought that was his turn to win the British Grand Prix. And it's not quite worked out that way. Obviously, Antonelli getting caught up in incidents and unfortunately not finishing the race due to that diffuser damage that was caused by, I think it was a Hadjar crashing into the back of him and pretty much flying off at Cops, I think it was. So, yeah, it was a scary one, definitely. But yeah, Mercedes was just a poor weekend overall. It happens though. Like you say, the weather plays such a massive factor. And somebody has to get it wrong, and you either have a team like McLaren that like pretty much they were so good and so pacey that they basically couldn't make a mistake because they were so far out in front they had time to think, or you have a team like someone like Hulkenberg who obviously made all the right calls, had a proper feel for the car throughout the weekend and succeeded with it, or you end up like Mercedes where you just have a stinking weekend and you just pretty much may as well not have even turned up.
Yeah, I think that's the point. They might as well have not turned up because it's really not kind of. I don't know. I couldn't quite understand how they got that badly wrong, really, because, like you say, those cooler temperatures, this could have been an opportunity. But yeah, I think, once you get stuck in that traffic at certain points of the race, and I mean, the big loss was that formation lap kind of gamble, because there's not many of them that actually benefit from that in the end. And it looked weird anyway, just seeing the grid so empty because of how many cars dived in. But they were maybe a little bit too hasty with that one, and in the end, actually, they lost tons of time. But I'm interested what you think about Antonelli, and there's obviously all this talk about Verstappen at the minute, and we have spoke about that. But Antonelli is on a pretty awful run of form at the minute. I was just bringing up the stats there. But the last 6 races, he's not finished in the points in 5 of them, and DNF in 4 of those. And Monaco, you can kind of almost count that as a DNF as well, because he was just, trundling around the back the whole time. He obviously had that podium in Canada, and that was a really special moment, and he has had special moments this season. But how long can this continue, Owen, before that becomes a question of, well, hang on a minute, this guy is for the future, but is he actually ready yet? I mean, I don't want to sound like a dinosaur here, because, I'm all for young drivers, but that's pretty terrible, isn't it? I mean, 1 points finish, and obviously it being a podium in 6 races.
Yeah, I think Mercedes and Toto and bits and pieces, they probably would have taken this into their calculations that, 2025, I think Mercedes had seen it as pretty much a write-off year anyway. They're not going to be challenging for the championship. Obviously, it's important where they finish. But, if Antonelli had come in this season and consistently put the car in the points and had a really good season, for the 2026 car, they could have gone, you know what, we've got a solid driver lineup for 2026. Whereas they've experimented with him. At the moment, it's not quite working out. If they give him to the end of the season, things might change around again. But yeah, I feel as if he's just that fraction too inexperienced at this moment in time. He not for Formula One. I think he's definitely Formula One level, but just not quite at the Mercedes level just yet. He needs to be in a team where he's sort of competitive with his teammate, and can learn it out that way. Maybe one of the teams that Mercedes supplies engines for, like Williams, would be a good sort of spot for him. Obviously, their driver lineup is pretty much sorted, but then anything can happen in Formula One. We know that. So yeah, I can, at this moment in time, I can see him being potentially dropped at the end of the season, especially if they get Verstappen. I think my view has changed since last week. I think that Toto wants to pair Verstappen and Russell together, and at least for 2026, and then sort of see what happens after that.
Yeah, I agree. I think, you just see how Russell is driving at the minute, and he is in kind of almost peak form. I just think Mercedes would be crazy to drop their lead driver at the minute, and just keep like some kind of faith that Antonelli will get there. But when the question is here, when will Antonelli might take 2+ years to actually get to that level of the very top. He's clearly got the pace, but it's the consistency. And at the end of the day, you're not going to score many points in the constructors if you haven't got consistency. And I know that this crash at Silverstone was completely not his fault. I mean, don't get me wrong, he was still in that kind of back end of the field, but it was obviously Hadger that did punt him off, and he couldn't do anything about it. But I just think, Hamilton went into that McLaren in 07 and had a hell of a lot of prep for that, and was obviously on the money straight away because he is, one of the greats of all time. And it was different situations. Verstappen had a year at, Toro Rosso before he went into that Red Bull. These drivers, they have the prep before they make that big jump. And I just think this is a mistake now from Mercedes. I'm going to go as far as that, really, because they could miss out on being, second in the Constructors' Championship this season, which, is not what the big prize is, but it will cost them maybe quite a bit in terms of prize money and, future seasons, because I just think Antonelli is not there yet. And it's actually, what as well, Owen, I don't think it's good for his confidence, because if he keeps DNFing and if he keeps crashing out, that pressure will start to become, I think more people will have this conversation like we're having now of, well, what's going on here. And I don't know, I'm not jumping the gun too much here, and I probably sound like I am, but it's kind of just, yeah, I've got big concerns about that.
Yeah, I do agree with you. I think they have made a mistake. If you look at how much time Antonelli actually was given in a Formula One car, at least that we know of, what was it? A few practice sessions or something like that.
Yeah.
Actually that were visible. I remember, and even Monza last year, where he was given a practice session, he crashed it. You know,
You know what I mean?
so yeah, I think I'm a sort of the similar view really that maybe it is a mistake, but at the same time, I think that Mercedes were obviously prepared to take that risk with him, and I think maybe they do have a plan for him. If come the end of this year, he's not quite ready. They would have surely catered for that outcome because what is he, 17 years old?
Yeah.
Incredibly young, incredibly young. I couldn't even drive when I was 17. It took me till 18 to pass my flipping driving test. So to be driving a Formula One car at 17 years old is like sort of no mean feat. So
Absolutely.
we'll see. Like I say, he's a young man. You don't want to damage his confidence. But then he also seems as if that he has got that sort of proper Formula One driver mentality where he can just sort of pick himself up from anything. He believes in himself, and he's brave in bits and pieces. So yeah, we'll see. But I think my view now is that if Toto can get hold of Max, then that's what they'll be Max and Russell next year. But it could all change now. What's come out this week?
Absolutely. And I'll happily see this clipped up in a few years' time once Antonelli's, a multiple world champion and dominating at the front of F1. And here we are saying, oh, he's not ready yet. Fine. But I will be surprised. I will be surprised because I don't think this is necessarily the right preparation for that, if you like. Right, I think that's pretty much most things covered with the British Grand Prix. Another eventful British Grand Prix, like we've said before, and like Owen said earlier, race of the season so far, I think we're going to go with. So, yes, Belgium is next up, but we'll do another podcast to preview that. And then, but now we're going to move on really to the big news that has happened in the last day or so, and really, this came out of nowhere. You have to say, it's been, I don't know, a lot of people have maybe wanted this to happen or thought that this is brewing up for quite some time. But Christian Horner has been sacked from Red Bull Racing. It was the bombshell news yesterday. And Lauren Mekis is going to take over from RB now to Red Bull as the new CEO of that team. He's going to take over the duties of the team principal role, and Alan Permain has been promoted within RB up to that team principal role there. Christian Horner hasn't said the exact reasons for his departure just yet, and Red Bull themselves have not released a statement on the exact reasoning. What do we think's gone on here, Owen? And two things, actually. What do you think's happened, and do you think it's the right call?
I think it's definitely in relation to what we saw at the beginning of last year, heading into Bahrain. I think it's to do with that. And I think there's multiple other factors that go towards it as well. Christian Horner has been at Red Bull Racing for 20 years. He's built that team from the ground up. That is the thing you have to give him credit for. He's obviously a very, very good team principal, and has delivered premium success for Red Bull Racing. Countless constructors championships, countless drivers championships, and now we're in a position where we're in sort of, this is defining for the era of Formula One that we're in. I think it's definitely down to it's got to be down to what we saw last year. I've also read that he's interested in putting a consortium together to go and buy Alpine, and go and work with his mate Flavio Briatore. And I think there's a few other, and it also could be down to the performance of the Red Bull this season, and also the performance of the second drivers that he's consistently put into that those Red Bull seats. It's no, for me, it's no coincidence that Perez was doing all right in that Red Bull in 2021. 2022 came, looked okay, was winning races in a Red Bull still, and then just dropped off. And that, for me, that Red Bull hasn't got bad. That Red Bull has been steered more and more. I think this season it's not quite good enough to win a world championship, but it's been more and more set up to meet Verstappen's needs as their number one driver. And I think Horner probably would have been behind some of that, making sure that Max is happy. I think the relationship with Jos Verstappen as well would have probably led to some of that. I think Jos Verstappen is behind of some of what has been leaked about Horner, allegedly. I don't want to get into any legal trouble for that. But I think, there's all sorts of things at play here. But I think, if we do want to look at a performance-related issue, it could be to do with the second drivers. He's gone through Perez, who he's basically finished the career of if he doesn't come back with Cadillac when they come to the grid next year. Obviously had Lawson in the car. Got rid of him after 3 races. So obviously Tsunoda now as well. They've been through like countless drivers now, and think of drivers prior to Perez, in Gasly and Albon as well. These are drivers that could have had their careers ruined by Red Bull and have proved elsewhere in other cars that they have got pace. So if it is a performance-related issue, it could be something to do with that. But I think the main factor here is what we saw last year. Will we see something come out more in the next sort of fortnight or so? I think so. I think Red Bull have cut the ties quickly to sort of try and look as clean as possible because they know something's coming.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I pretty much agree with that. I think as well, it's because this 3-week gap. I think it was a perfect time for them to do it because obviously the storm of this will settle down by the time they go to Spa, because 3 weeks is a long time in F1, and they'll still be asking about it, obviously, and it'll still be a big talking point. But if we were going to Spa this weekend, then that would be really, everybody's question. I think as well, it's the big personnel that have left in the last year or two. That's really, I think being the kind of, knife in the heart with the Red Bull team in terms of going from this super dominant team with Verstappen to just dropping further and further into the field. I think the Adrian Newey loss was huge. I also think the Rob Marshall loss was as big because he went from the 2023 Red Bull to joining McLaren after that season, and then you see what McLaren have become. You've also had Jonathan Wheatley join another team. They've just been absolutely picked off here in terms of personnel, and you just wonder, there's got to be reasons why they're all one by one leaving, and then it'd be maybe a different story if Red Bull was still performing this season, but they're not. They're getting worse and worse, and there's the talk now of Verstappen potentially leaving. We don't know Max's exact relation with Christian. I actually don't think that there's an issue there, but there absolutely is between Jos and Christian, like you mentioned there, Owen. So there's things there that Red Bull will know. Red Bull know that if they lose Max, they're really, really in trouble, and that's just not a good position to be in, isn't it?
I think this might be heavily to do with trying to keep Max as well. If Max is of the view that he would like to move somewhere else, and Jos is also lobbying for something like that, it's get rid of Horner or keep Max Verstappen. I think Red Bull would prefer to keep their multiple-time world champion. They obviously believe in him, and they believe that he is the difference maker. At the moment he is. He's putting a poor Red Bull on pole at Silverstone.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just there's so many things at play here. There's multiple things. It's obvious to me that Red Bull Racing as an organisation, that the cart has been rocked. It's been rocked for like the past couple of years, really. Specifically after last year's sort of scandal at the start of the season. And I think this is sometimes what you see when a team has such dominant success. There's an element of arrogance that gets instilled in certain members of the team, whether that be through behavioural actions like this might be, or just basic development stuff. You look at Mercedes, they're very dominant for the turbo hybrid era, and reg change in 2022, and like they're nowhere near the team that they were throughout that era. And I think this is part and parcel of what happens. But there's definitely loads of stuff we don't know about going on in the background. This is purely just speculation. Like I said, it could be multiple things. It's interesting though. I'm excited to see where Formula One is going to go now. Could Red Bull be overtaken by their junior team? If this goes very badly for Red Bull, it's not impossible. It's not impossible. It could happen. So we'll see. They've lost the best car designer in Formula One in Newey. Aston Martin could potentially have an incredible car. So that's another team that will be above Red Bull next season. If you take the fact that Mercedes, McLaren, Ferrari will probably be ahead of them. Yeah, we'll see. This is era defining though, definitely. This is definitely era defining. Sure. This is a massive switch up on the Formula One grid.
Yeah, anyone that's been at a team for 20 years, it's always a huge deal when they depart or get booted out of that team. The footage actually was leaked. Well, I say leaked. It was put out by Sky F1 of the kind of the goodbye speech, if you like, from Christian Horner to his Red Bull kind of staff and team, and he did actually touch on that he is technically still employed by Red Bull. So there's an element of this here where he is probably not. He probably does know why, because nobody gets sacked and they're not actually told why. He probably does know, but he just can't say yet. And Red Bull themselves are probably choosing not to say.
I think there's probably some sort of play here by Red Bull as well, because it's probably they can't actually prove that Christian has done anything if he is suspected of something, or they haven't quite got the right grounds to sack him from his or eliminate him from Red Bull, the company in whole. So they've removed him from the face of the organisation as team principal, and he's still employed by Red Bull. I mean, we could be completely wrong about this. Red Bull could be taking him out of the limelight while there's certain bits and pieces going on in the background, with a view to instilling him, maybe a year, 2 years down the line, once things have cleared up a bit. I don't know, because what other reason would there be for Red Bull keeping Horner employed if they don't want him as team principal anymore? What use is he to them as an organisation? I can't see any. It just brings heat to the situation.
I wonder if you mentioned earlier about the whole Alpine talk, maybe they, know something. You think of also the whole Toto Wolff games here of, trying to just unsettle a team with the whole Verstappen thing. Maybe there is stuff going on behind the scenes here, and, Red Bull know what's going on, and they've decided, we want to take action before, they're really left in the dirt here, because, Christian Horner does speak quite well in interviews and, can, get his words right in terms of, portraying a certain thing. But maybe he was, there was rumours from kind of absolutely nowhere really, not that long ago, of Christian Horner going to Ferrari, which I don't think that'll happen. And I think that'd be a big shock if they got rid of Fred Vasseur, just because of this season. But again, where do those rumours come from? It's a very strange thing to say. And you think of Adrian Newey at Aston Martin, Christian Horner could have been speaking with them. Who knows what has happened here? At the minute, it is, like you say, Owen, pure speculation, and the rumour mill is absolutely overturning at the minute. And, it could be anything, but we'll find out. And obviously in the next podcast, we'll probably have that information to discuss it. But I think that's
for that.
Exactly, yeah. Well, let's hope so. I mean, because in a few weeks' time, if we've still not got any answers, then we'll probably be even more confused. But I think that is our lot for this week on the TFR podcast. Thank you, Owen, for joining me once again. Been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me again.
Not a problem. And, there was plenty to get through there. And be sure to subscribe and follow the channel on your video or audio platform of choice if you want to see a bit more reaction to the Christian Horner news in the next podcast. We'll be then looking ahead to the Belgian Grand Prix that's coming up, and then probably some other news that has happened in this mini break in the middle of the season. We'll be back in the next one, and we'll see you then.